The Lion King symbolises a high point for Disney animation in the 1990s after a huge decline in the 80s, and remains one of the most influential and successful animated properties of all time. Here we'll take a look at Disney's animation struggles leading into the 90s, The Lion King's place in the Disney Renaissance period, the influences on the movie's music and animation, the Kimba vs Simba controversy, and the lasting legacy of the animated movie. Arguably, since the death of Walt Disney himself in 1966 and his co-founder, business partner and brother Roy O. Disney in 1971, the studio had struggled to find a new direction following the loss of its leadership, and by the late 1980s, Disney had been on a continuous decline. This steady decrease in popularity and profitability was only worsened by big risks like 1985's
The Black Cauldron,
which was Disney's first PG-13 animation and at the time the most expensive animated film ever produced. Unfortunately for Disney, The Black Cauldron turned out to be a little too dark and creepy for its audience, who were expecting another classic Disney animation, and the movie failed to make back even half of its production budget at the box office. On top of the studio's own failures, they came up against a wholly new threat in the form of the Don Bluth Company. Don Bluth, who was originally a key figure at Disney and played a key role in variably animating, designing, producing and directing, left Disney in 1979. When he left, Don Bluth took a number of other animators with him, and that group went on to form their own company. The Don Bluth Company quickly became Disney's key competitor, and as Disney hit an all-time low, Bluth followed up his debut title The Secret of Nim with a number of 80s animated hits such as An American Tail, The Land Before Time and All Dogs Go to Heaven, each of which went up against Disney for the animated movie of the year. In fact, it wasn't until 1989 with the release of The Little Mermaid that Disney managed to re-establish themselves as the top dog, with The Little Mermaid starting off an infamous decade now known as the Disney Renaissance. This period is widely cited as a return to form for the studio, with a considerable effort put into reimagining classic stories with just enough of the signature Disney style and sound to make them a hit. And after huge movies like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin, the biggest of them all came in 1994. The initial story idea for what would eventually become The Lion King came from Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was the chairman of the Walt Disney Company. Whilst promoting 1988's Oliver & Company, Katzenberg came up with a rough idea for the story, based on his own experiences and the idea of when it is you become an adult. Evolving from that initial idea, the story was fleshed out and iterated on a number of times, going through the working titles The King of the Kalahari, King of the Beasts, and then King of the Jungle. That is until the studio realised that there weren't any lions in the jungle. Whilst the story was being developed, the animation teams at Disney were given the choice as to which feature they would work on, The Lion King or Pocahontas. As Pocahontas was pitched as a historical epic, focusing on race relations and star-crossed lovers, many at Disney saw it as the next Beauty and the Beast, and so much of Disney's top talent chose to work on that. This left a number of less experienced animators to work on The Lion King, most of whom had never led animation on a character before, although there were some veteran animators still there. I'd argue this younger and less experienced team, who, let's face it, were the underdogs, but in all honesty were still some of the best animators in the world, were actually helped by the challenge of wanting to prove themselves. This younger and less experienced team was given their chance to shine, and that really shows in the final movie. In terms of art direction, the original concept for how The Lion King would look and feel was more stylized, with the African artwork directly influencing the movie's design. This is something they decided to steer away from, but it was something director Roger Allers returned to with The Emperor's New Groove, where everything was heavily inspired by Peruvian and Incan designs, with nearly every surface, building and material adorned with patterns that echo those styles. But for Lion King, Disney decided to lean into a more realistic look, aim for something that could be seen on a National Geographic documentary, and so looked to the films of David Lean, such as Lawrence of Arabia, and the artwork of N.C. Wyeth, who illustrated a number of adventure novels, including maybe his most famous and influential work, Treasure Island. In terms of music, Disney had been on a winning streak with The Little Mermaid, Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast, all winning the Oscar for Best Original Score and Best Original Song, and so it's safe to say there was a fair amount of pressure on The Lion King. Disney's first step was to hire lyricist Tim Rice, who had worked on Aladdin, and his first step was to recommend Elton John, although Rice never thought it would be possible to get him. And so instead of Elton John, Disney went to ABBA. The conversations with ABBA, however, fell through, and Elton John was eventually brought on board. Rice credits Elton John's style of insisting the words come first as a big part of why the songs in The Lion King are so powerful. On the score side of things, Disney went to Hans Zimmer, who had worked on their live-action Cool Runnings a year earlier. Zimmer wanted an African feel to the music, and initially wanted a full African choir rather than an orchestra, although after he started work on the film realised that a combination of the two was the better idea. Zimmer, whose own father passed away when Zimmer was only 6 years old, decided he wanted a real emotion to the music, and possibly even start making children think about mortality and really consider the circle of life. To capture the African feel, Zimmer brought in Lebo M, a South African singer who would go on to write a number of the lyrics, form and lead the choir that features in much of the score. Lebo M became so instrumental, no pun intended, to the point that it's his voice that opens the movie. He then wrote much of the album Rhythm of the Pride Lands, which was a combination of some unused tracks from the movie as well as some new material. The most famous track from that album being He Lives in You, which features prominently in the musical adaptation of The Lion King and accompanies the opening sequence of The Lion King 2, Simba's Pride. Of course, both the original songs and score are a key part of why The Lion King was such a huge hit, and following in the footsteps of The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin, The Lion King went on to win Best Original Score and Best Original Song at the Oscars. Continuing their streak of casting big-name actors, which had been pushed further than ever before with Robin Williams in Aladdin, The Lion King saw the likes of Matthew Broderick as adult Simba, Jeremy Irons as Scar, who was originally supposed to be played by Tim Curry until he dropped out to take part in Home Alone 2,
Pizza.
Rowan Atkinson as Zazu, James Earl Jones as Mufasa,
What?
Nathan Lane as Timon, Whoopi Goldberg as Shenzi the hyena, Cheech Marin as Banzai, with the original intention being that Tommy Chong, the other half of the comedy duo Cheech and Chong, played the third hyena, but he was unavailable. And so, as the movie found its style, both in terms of design and sound, the story was continuously tweaked and developed. Originally, the movie saw Scar leading an army of baboons against Mufasa's lion pride. In this version, the character of Rafiki was a cheetah, and the whole thing was seemingly a much darker story, one that focused on Scar trying to corrupt Simba and make him a poor leader. With this direction falling short in terms of character arcs and just not feeling like a Disney hit, the entire narrative was given a refresh. Here, much more of the recognisable elements came into play. Scar was made into Mufasa's brother, and so the Hamlet influence started to take shape. Although the Shakespeare influence was apparently an organic evolution and not intentional, there was a point where the film was referred to internally as Hamlet with Bambi. Similarly, the conflict was shifted to lions versus hyenas rather than baboons, and much more religious symbolism was brought into play, such as Simba seeing a burning vision of his father, which was the Lion King's version of Moses getting a vision from the burning bush. The story started to find its way as a new animal-themed take on older stories that dealt with growing up and redemption. Now, up until this point, I've painted out the story behind what may be the most popular animated movie of all time to be a pretty optimistic and inspirational story, one not unlike Simba's own journey in the movie, a story of discovery and finding what the movie was meant to be. But as with most great success stories that sound a little too good to be true, there is a dark and pretty outrageous scandal buried within The Lion King's origin story. Jumping back to 1950, Japanese animator Osamu Tezuka, who created Astro Boy and would later be cited as the father of manga and the Japanese equivalent to Walt Disney himself, began working on an animated show called Jungle Emperor, and one other title that I'll get to in a minute. The show started out as a manga in the 50s, eventually becoming an animated show in the 60s, where it was the first colour animated show. From there it was distributed across the world, had a theatrical film in 1966, a follow-up series later in 1966, a remake of the show in 1989 not long after Tezuka's death, and another animated movie in 1991. Now you may have noticed that one of the show's titles, Jungle Emperor, was similar to the in-progress title for Lion King, King of the Jungle. Well, the actual English translation of the title of the various shows and movies from the 60s onwards, but in particular the remakes in 1989 and 1991, a mere 5 years before The Lion King, is Kimba the White Lion. Now, you may argue that yes, Kimba and Simba do sound similar, but both names are in fact Swahili words. Kimba means the body, or get stuck in Lithuanian, whereas Simba means power or lion in Swahili. And as far as animating lions goes, there's only so much you can do, and so there were bound to be some similarities. In fact, most people would probably argue that there is no way Disney would just rip off a pre-existing cartoon. And you may even argue that shots like this, this, and these are all just coincidences. They came up with this idea and story all on their own. After all, the team behind Lion King just unknowingly stumbled on the Hamlet homage, because why wouldn't professional storytellers be aware of who William Shakespeare is? There is every chance that this is a genuine coincidence. Disney have continuously denied the link between the two, and have even, if you can believe it, tried to sue Kimba, which again came years earlier. But for me and a lot of people, including a huge group of Japanese animators, movie critics at the time, and armies of fans ever since, there is something more to the apparent mystery. Some animators admit to knowing about the show, with it being a popular show when they themselves were children, and even adult Simba himself, Matthew Broderick, was seemingly under the impression he was playing Kimba in some sort of remake. But for me, the icing on the cake of the whole Kimba vs Simba controversy is the movie's director, Roger Allers. Now, I like Roger Allers. He worked on the story for Oliver and Company, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and you can't help but feel sorry for him after watching The Sweatbox, the Hush documentary about the turbulent process of making Emperor's New Groove, Allers' project immediately after The Lion King, which he was somewhat unceremoniously stripped from. And yet Allers, who claims to have discovered Kimba only late on in the process of creating The Lion King, actually lived in and animated in Japan for 2 years in the mid-80s, again only a few years before The Lion King, and where not only Kimba but Kimba's creator, who again had been referred to as the Walt Disney of Japan, was as famous and influential as ever, even in his later years. Now, the Simba vs Kimba debacle is far from the only controversy The Lion King has gone up against. Another is the infamous sex scene, which according to Disney is an SFX Easter egg put there by the SFX or Special Effects department. But if you thought it couldn't get any bigger than sending subliminal messages about sex to its viewers, or seemingly ripping off a beloved Japanese animation, you'd be wrong. After its release, a devoted hyena researcher attempted to sue Disney for defamation of character towards hyenas, citing the irreparable damage done to the hyena brand. Now, there is something to be said for the portrayal of certain animals in influential kids movies, with 101 Dalmatians leading to a surge in popularity, improper breeding, and unfortunately often uncontrollable adult Dalmatians. And so Disney does have a track record with the real world implications to animals it puts forward. But to go as far as suing Disney for its portrayal and boycotting the movie does seem a little far-fetched, given that The Lion King also showcases a meerkat doing the hula, a baboon doing kung fu, and animals singing, dancing, having a fully enforced monarchy. Shifting back to a more positive note, at least for Disney, the movie went on to become the highest grossing film of 1994, with a number of Academy Awards, the Golden Globe for Best Picture in the musical or comedy category, as well as a number of other awards and nominations. On top of its box office and award success, the movie was a hit in terms of merchandise, with Disney earning an estimated $1 billion from merchandising, again just in 1994. This success only continued for The Lion King, where upon its VHS release, it didn't take long for The Lion King to become the best-selling VHS of all time, with an estimated 4.5 million being sold on the day of release and amassing a total of 32 million units sold, with second place being held by Disney's Snow White, which came in at around 5 million less copies, selling 27 million. In terms of sequels, the Lion King characters have appeared across a number of Disney-related media, and of course featured in the direct-to-video sequels and animated shows. The first of these being the Timon and Pumbaa TV show, which aired from 1995 to 1999. The Lion King 2, Simba's Pride, which focuses on Simba and Nala's daughter Kiara, and The Lion King 1.5, which is a sort of prequel that shows Timon and Pumbaa leading up to and during the events of the original movie. And even more recently, a Disney Junior show called The Lion Guard began, which focuses on Simba and Nala's second-born child, Kion, who leads the Lion Guard, a group that protects the Pride Lands. 2019 then saw the release of the photorealistic CGI remake of The Lion King, starring Donald Glover as adult Simba, Beyoncé as adult Nala, and the return of James Earl Jones as Mufasa. Despite many reviewers taking away points for it being possibly the most copy and paste remake in Disney's remake library, the graphics were undeniably incredible. The music was much of the original with some fun new twists, and most importantly for Disney, the movie made a terrifying amount of money. Because in the year of Captain Marvel, Avengers Endgame, Spider-Man Far From Home, which is admittedly distributed by Sony, the Aladdin remake, Toy Story 4, Frozen 2 and Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, Disney definitely needed that extra boost. But in terms of legacy, perhaps the most successful part of The Lion King's follow-ups is the musical adaptation. Adapted by Julie Taymor, who brought her unique style that insisted on keeping the humans visible as they worked with the puppets rather than full costumes, the musical is the third longest continuously running show on Broadway, behind Phantom of the Opera and Chicago, and is the highest grossing musical of all time. All in all, between the original movie, its animated sequels, the musical and the remake, the endlessly popular music, and thanks to that special place it holds in so many 80s and 90s kids' hearts, The Lion King is one of Disney's largest properties, and thanks to them continuously finding a way to keep fans interested, likely will be for a long time to come.